Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know who I'm talking to. Any of you who've seen me in person know that I always wear a hat. So, we're going to act like this is really, really live. I'm excited to talk to you today about this. It's my newest research that I started a year ago at Stanford University on what's really going on with women. I'll tell you about what that project is. Today, we're here to do the highlights and also to think a little bit together about solutions. Throughout the process, for fun, Derek's going to throw up some polls. It'll give us all a little data on what we're experiencing of the concepts that I'm telling you about. And also, if you hang out with me till the end, you'll be able to help pick a title for our T-shirts and get some more info about some prizes. So with that, I'd much rather let you see the slides and not me, because I hate how I look on these things. Look, guys, I just don't look like my 25-year-old self. And so let's just get started. All right. So we're starting with our slides, and I'll walk us through this process and talk a little bit about what's going on. So let's think about this for a minute. When people start to think about women's issues, they kind of talk about stage one, which was sort of like this back when women got their voting rights. I guess I was wave two of the women's movement. And now we're talking about changes. And this topic has become more and more popular. It's particularly popular in the high-tech area. Now, what is going on? We've got many, many youth programs. Government is funding STEM, HR, and all the tech companies and all the companies everywhere are changing their hiring policies and making statements about culture. There's lots of women events and networking and so forth. The effort is, the basic understanding is if we just get women in the door, then we'll increase our women in tech companies. But unfortunately, unlike all the other hero types of jobs like lawyers and doctors and iBankers, we see increasing numbers of women, and the women stay in the job and in the company. But in tech, in our high-tech environments, we're watching women get in the door and walk out the door. Women are leaving at a greater rate than men. They say it's organizational climate, but what does that really mean? And 50% are leaving the career altogether within 12 years. So the problem in the end is not going to be solved by getting more and more women in the door, then they're going to all go out the door, or by working so super hard on glass ceiling issues, because if no one's there to go up, where are we going? And this is the problem that's really been bothering me. As one of my colleagues at NC Wit said, we excel at documenting the problem, but we don't excel at understanding enough to offer solutions that are truly transformative. So as more and more young women came and talked to me, because I coach a lot of women, I coach a lot of men in our field, and I was increasingly disturbed in the last 5 or 8 years at the number of women crying about how do I go into the room with all these men? They don't feel comfortable. And I thought, really? It's 25, 30 years later. What's going on? It was time for us to start to understand, as I would, given that I do deep dive understandings of people and their lives. That is what I do as part of my work in tech. That my thought was, hey, let's go understand the real guts of women working inside of tech companies today. So me with my Stanford students went out into the field, and we talked with, at this point, 10 women between 30 and 50. They're all successful in every kind of job type, in every kind of company, and they have all kinds of family styles. And we wanted to understand what was really going on, what pushed them into the industry, what happened last week, what happened in their meetings, what happened with their team, what's really going on in their experience of daily living. And so through that process, we came up with a core framework that I'm going to share with you today about what we think is really influencing women to stay. Because rather than ask the question, why do women leave? I wanted to start with the idea of, well, what's drawing them? Why do they stay? If we understand something like that, we're going to do better. And I also want to let you know, because we'll be asking about this in the end, that we're not done. We'd like more deep dive field research with more job types, people who left the team, people who left the company, people who left the field. And I've started collecting data about men and their experience, because is it really different than the women? That's another interesting question. We also feel that if we could measure these core concepts and see how companies are doing, we would get a little bit of a comparison, and it would help companies and people see where they're weak and where they're strong. So we're just finishing the first set of questions that we're going to start testing soon, and we need some help for that. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is the Women's Project, the findings that we had, and also then talk to you about solutions that I have learned from, 28 years of working with men, women, and teams in our industry. So what are we talking about here? What delights women? And you'll know that the topic of this webinar is the 4 factors, and you're going to only see 3 here, so the 4th is a secret. I'll tell you later on. What we have to understand is that daily life is operating inside of the corporate culture. So the corporation is creating, if you would, a milieu that says what's going on. But how that corporate culture filters down, or how country culture and societal culture affects, is at a, if you would, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, it's at a kind of outside their level. And we'll talk about the readiness. What we have found is that deep in the guts of everyday life is where the rubber hits the road. The first, and I believe the most important dimension, is what's going on in the team that the woman is working with. Now, you may be a manager, you may be on the team, but you're still working with a team, or you're managing a team. And when that team feels like it's really up to something together on something everyone cares about, women have a great sense of connection and a psychological sense of community, and that drives them to stay. But in addition, we discovered that women need something from the people that they're working with, both the managers and the team. In order to take on a challenge, often women need a push. But when you push them, then they need support. So we're going to talk about that. And the last piece of this is that women need role models. They need to see themselves in the future out there. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So let's get started. I want to talk about, what do we mean by this tight, cohesive team up to something big? When the women talk about this, they're talking about what they do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday with the people that we're working with. They talk about the team as being dynamic and work focused. They're not into drama. They're not into, blame and accusation. They're focused on getting the job done. And they can talk to each other about problems. Their communication is very direct. They can critique the work. They can handle the critique by others. All of them can problem solve together, and so they feel heard. They may take on leadership roles. They may partner. They may follow. They'll do all of those things because in that context, their value is so clear. The value of all the team members is so clear that they are simply moving, if you would, as one organism to try to solve the big problem. The women talk about the fact that it's the people that attract them, not just because they click and get along, and they do. They can talk about work, and they can talk about life. And we're not talking about teams that have lots of women. We're talking about teams that are fundamentally male dominated. They can do things together in work. They can do things together out of work. But what truly counts is that they're attractive people. They're smart, they're dynamic, and they all want to make a difference. There is the sense of being up to something big. But what is that up to something? We also ask the question oftentimes whether women have different needs. Well, this is what the women said. On top, more than anything else, is they can't be bored. They hate boredom. And they also value making something real, touchable, tangible. They're builders, they're makers. They want to see the next innovative thing coming out of their own hands. Or if they're in UX, to get real data and watch it touch the project. They care about being on influential projects, but that could be a variety of things. If it's important to the company, if it's making industry change, if it's the first of its kind, if it really affects people's lives, and yes, if powerful people think it's a good idea. They want to learn. As long as they're learning, they're staying. The challenge of the new tech, the challenge of figuring out people, taking on a new role. If they're learning, they're attracted and they stay. And fundamentally, if their work and the work of the team is valued by, and that means funded by the company, they're going to feel good about it. But in the end, if they've done it over and over, they get to a point where they say, well, I've been there, done that. It's time for something new. Newness and moving on is also part of the need inside the team. So if the work itself is stimulating and the team is amazing, then women succeed. They belong, the team is dynamic, they feel valued, and they're making something neat or cool, you might say. Okay? So that's our first concept. Now, what about this push and support thing? So let me tell you a story. My business partner is Hugh Beyer. We've been working together for 28 years. And we started in Context together. And he's a developer. He's an engineer. He's a coder. He's one of those guys. And we were working together on one of our projects, and I was nobody at the time. I had, done not a whole lot. And of course, the whole room was always filled with men. There were, one woman in the whole building. We're really talking about no women. So we were sitting in a meeting one day with about 15 other people, and Hugh was running the meeting. And somebody asked a question, and Hugh said, Karen will tell you about that. And in the meeting, with no notice, he handed me the pen. Now, what was I going to do? Run out of the room crying? So I stood up and I took over the meeting. And I started to run it in order to introduce the concept of users. This is what we mean by the push. Women, as we like to say it, and they said it themselves, need to be thrown into the ring. They need to be shoved out there. They need to be not just offered a challenge, but whacked into the challenge. There was a young woman who's in her late 20s recently I spoke with, and it was promotion time, and she wasn't ready. Oh, no, I'm not good enough, all this stuff. And her teammates told her she should do it. And her manager told her she should do it. And her friends told her she should do it. And she was shoved and pushed until the day before she finally ran around preparing all the papers. And she got the promotion. Women do better when they are pushed. They aren't comfortable, they said, having to promote themselves. That feels self-aggrandizing. Not all of them, but many of them. Yes? Many of them think that they're simply not ready. They aren't prepared enough. They didn't do enough. They haven't checked off all the requirements of the next job level. So they don't do it. So we have to push. But you can't push without support. These two things are surrounding the woman, the push and then support. Because once they're pushed, they need to strategize with someone. They need to figure out how to do it. When they think they want to take on a new challenge, they want to talk to a lot of people. They want to gather the data. They want to figure out a way to do it. Or they just want to feel like there's someone in the room who believes in them, like Hugh believed in me. So what does support look like? Let me talk to you about it because, remember, I went to college and there weren't very many women there. I can count on one hand in every psych department that I ever went to, the number of women. One finger, sorry. And so I wanted to do some research. I never wanted to do whatever with the courses. I always wanted to do something else. And my not yet then husband was also a psychologist, and he was ahead of me, and he was also doing research. So we strategized what I should do until I knew what I was going to do. And then we had targeted this professor, and we walked over to the building, and he stood at the end of the hall while I walked down to talk to this male professor, who, by the way, proceeded on that day to talk to me about his own feeling of being a hypocrite and that he was an imposter and the feds were going to come and take him away. Men have that feeling too. But because Les stood at the end of the hall, I knew I wasn't alone in my endeavor. In the end, women do best when their managers and their team members are pushing them forward and also giving them support when there is a base of value out of which they can operate. All right, what about this role model thing? Everyone talks about role models. Companies have all kinds of events. Anita Borg has got millions of women standing up in front of us. What does this role model thing really mean? Well, on the left, you see Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She's a justice in our Supreme Court, as I'm sure you know. And if you don't know, she's also called the notorious RBG. Now, I had occasion to meet her, which was mind-blowing in and of itself just a few weeks ago. And what's interesting is that RBG was asked recently by someone, who were your role models? And she just looked at them and she said, but I was the only one. I had no role model. She had no role model. Most women over 50 had no role model who was a woman. What we had were men and husbands and partners and teams who supported us and who gave us the idea of what the life was that we could live. When we think about role models and when we talk to the women in the study, what they told us were stories of their parents, of their brothers, of their professors, pushing them into the ring and supporting and mentoring them. When we think about the idea of a role model, we're thinking about somebody who not only believes in us, but who represents the type of life we might live. So we're not looking for people who are way out there, because I can tell you, even having met RBG, I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if I could be RBG. Her life was so amazing. What she has done is so far that I can't imagine me doing what she did one day at a time to fight for women's rights and to achieve her level of stature. Because of course, we all just get there one day at a time. And we do it by looking to our managers, looking to people we know in a little bit more power on the side of us. We do it by looking at the human beings in our real life who we can talk to. And when we can see real women there, living a life we can imagine ourselves live, doing a job we can imagine ourselves doing, we think maybe we can go there. And I wondered about this, and in one of my interviews with a young man who was here, he also talked about his role models and mentors, and those were women living the life he could imagine himself to be. When we think about role models, we are thinking about someone not only that would inspire us, that we can go forward, but like someone live who you can talk to, whose life you can watch. The superstars are too hard for us to deal with. Now, the problem is that when we then talk to the women about promotion and taking on promotion, what they talk back about, a good percent of them who have turned down promotion, they say, I don't want to live that life. I don't like that life. It's got way too long of hours. It's inflexible for families. There's no non-work life. Forget families. What if I just want to work out? There's politics in the company. There's stress. You have to fire people. It's lonely. Blech. They don't like that life. If the people who have responsibility don't live a life that anyone wants to be, why would they want to go in that direction? Now, on the other hand, some of the women who were managers said they always wanted to lead. One woman talked about, telling everyone what to do when they were kids. They like to manage other people and help them achieve their careers. They like to manage teams and they simply like influence. You may be of one type or you may be of another. But if the life that women in your real world are living are not the life that you want to emulate, you're not going to feel like you want to move in that direction. So we need real role models who are living lives every single day that makes sense to us. So these are the three big needs. The team with something really interesting, the way we push women into the ring, and the idea of an image of myself in the future, all together. And what's interesting, and this is a beginning that I really want to pursue more, is that when we looked at the life experience in their stories of coming up, we found these three things repeated over and over. I was shocked at how many women talked about their brothers. And that made me reflect that I'm the first of six, and I have four brothers that came right after me because my sister was, they call us the bookends, we're on either end. So I've been leading bands of boys for a really long time. They talked about their parents in tech or women who were immigrants pushing their children to succeed. They talked about the community of boys they hung out with in school. And then they talked about university, where they were on teams with other guys and they might have been the only woman. And the result of that is they got used to having these three things in their life. And then they came to the corporation where, yes, they were the only woman to walk in the room, but there was not a band of brothers. They were not up to something and felt a sense of belonging. They did not have the role models and they did not have the push and the support. So we come to our fourth factor. I've long resisted this because there's generations of discussion about in study after study after study after study about how women have all kinds of self-esteem issues. They have self-doubt, they lack self-confidence. And then, of course, there's all these comments about how, men are nasty, they're macho, they asked me to go and get the lunch and, things like that. Well, what about this idea of self-esteem? Is this a factor that we should be intervening in if we want to change companies? Or are we blaming the victim and just saying, if we go in there and we tune every single man and every single woman, then we're going to get change? Well, that's a really long process. So I'm looking for levers inside of companies that we can change that doesn't require the total remaking of all the personalities of the people inside. Because if I've learned anything in 28 years, I've learned that doing that is really hard. It's really hard. So, did we have this finding? Absolutely. Now remember, these are all successful women. If you know the affinity diagramming process, we had a whole wall that was just about, I don't believe in myself, I have lots of self-doubt, but also that my confidence grew over time as I worked in teams that supported me. Oh my goodness, we had the whole wall of men with their nasty comments and saying dumb things, sexual overtones, arguments, things getting sexualized, being treated dumber than everyone else in the room, asked to make the cookies, right? And also, thank you, asked to go and mentor other women because they don't like the feeling of being on the special bus. That women have to take care of women because, well, I don't know what, we're sort of a little bit broken. So, but the women also talked about, well, I'm used to men. I just let that roll off my back. Oh, they're just dumb. Men are just dumb. I'm sorry, men, any of you listening in, women, we know, they're just, really, just ignore them. And that's what the women were talking to us about. And they were self-reflective. Some of them talked about how they knew they were just too quiet and that wasn't going to work in this context. And others said, I'm too pushy. Given my family culture, I have to learn to shut my mouth. We all have to learn to be different. But what is absolutely true is that I see self-esteem as a dependent variable. If we put these processes inside of the organization, the women are simply going to feel better about themselves like anyone would because they will feel valued. And then they will achieve more, and then they'll have success. And we all know that if we put women on the teams, this has been documented over and over, that the teams are more creative. In the end, we have to get to a place where the managers and the team are taking care of each other continuously, but not in a caretaking way. When we think about it, what people comment on that undermines their feeling of competence more than anything else is micromanaging, whether that's the manager micromanaging or the team micromanaging, where every thought is second guessed, where every piece of work is, viewed as though there is something wrong with it. Now, I've found in many, many years of working with teams that pretty much nobody, men and women alike, handle being told their design isn't all that great very well. In fact, a long time ago, when we started taking developers out into the team, there was one developer, and he said, I don't want to go out into the field. He said to me, he said, I don't want to find out that people don't like what I'm making. Everybody is sensitive. Nobody wants to be working with managers or team members who they don't feel believe in what they're doing. So self-esteem is built on everyday life. And then we talk a whole lot about family issues, and the research, which is why I'm not going to deal with this much, the research shows over and over that these are not issues that are affecting women when they leave. In fact, I was talking to a young woman recently, and she left, and I was surprised she left. She had twins at home. They were babies, and so she told the company that she was leaving for family reasons. And then we had coffee. And she wasn't leaving for family reasons. She was leaving because they fired the manager she liked. Her team wouldn't listen to her. She didn't like the work she was doing. She was leaving because she didn't have the support and the structure and the good work that she wanted. And of course, then she went on to get another job. So what's the key about family? This is the center. The only thing that matters that the women talk to us about is that the company and the team has non-judgmental flexibility, because they need to be able to work at home when the kids are young or leave early to pick them up. And they fear, part of their fears is that others are judging how long they work or whether they did a good job because that kid was there. So they work extra hard. So if the company can have non-judgmental flexibility, then things are good. All right. So what are we really talking about here if we believe in these core attributes? That are two entry points that we want to attack are these key processes. And also because the people that are in the company right now are already experiencing themselves as kind of feeling like their personal power is undercut, we want to do some interventions to help the people that are already there. And these, therefore, are our 4 factors. But herein, in my opinion, is the crux. Right now, HR owns the problem. HR does the programming. HR contributes money to Anita Borg that tells you about networking. HR holds training programs. HR holds networking. But I think this is the wrong department, because the crux of the issue is right in the guts of everyday life. It's right in the product development days and nights. It's right in the guts of how we do the work, which of course is where I've been working for the last 28 years. It's right in the guts of what we do every day with each other. So if we're going to make change, we better start making a change down on the ground. So what can we do? We need to take a big picture and realize that every individual is impinged on by the country they grew up in, by the family they grew up in, by the industry and the values of the industry that they happen to be in, by the profession, whether it's developers, UX, product management, quality, by the specific company they're part of, then by their team, and then by the individual. All of these things come down and influence the team. Today, all these top things, country, industry, profession, company, are all trying to push money towards STEM, are all thinking about how they can get more women in the profession. They're thinking about it. So readiness is there. And they're doing some programs to touch individual teams. Don't, get me wrong. But are they doing the right things? And do they understand the guts of daily life? Do they understand how they might manipulate how people get things done in order to help everyone have a stronger sense of community and connectedness inside the team and basic value? So let's think about it together. What might happen? And this is coming from my experience and my observations. And what I really want you to do is I want you to start thinking. I want you to ask the question, what could you do? Does this give you any ideas? And if you have more ideas for me, please put it in your chat for Derek. There's a lot of talk about self-managed teams and all of these kinds of things. But in the end, every single team is self-managed. Every single team is a group of people that come together and learn how to behave with one another. They implicitly create rules of engagement. If they explicitly created rules of engagement, everyone would be able to talk about it. But implicit things happen. People take on roles. People do things. And once they do it once, they're kind of stuck with the job. Just like in a marriage, if the husband always does the bills, then he gets the job for life. And when he complains he doesn't want to do the bills anymore, he's trying to change the marriage deal. We create a deal every time we walk into an organization, every time we walk into a group of people, and every time we walk into a friendship. And if we engage with each other unreflectively, we'll end up often in places we don't want to be. What I've seen over and over is that if teams, for their requirements and design and daily life interactions, have an articulated process, they just don't get into stuff. Now, contextual design is a structured process. So is code reviews. So is Agile. So are a lot of processes that we have. When we articulate the roles, the rules, and the responsibilities and how to get out of conflict, people do much better. I will tell you right now that I've been leading teams 28 years. We have never had a gender issue, but we always knew what to do. So I'm going to talk to you about one of our processes just to give you the idea. This is an interpretation session. After people come out from the field, having done a field interview, a cross-functional team of people get together to interpret the data and write down what matters. So what do they have first? There's a structured team meeting. Everyone knows what they're supposed to do. They know that the mainline conversation is what happened with this user, not their personal opinion, not their design ideas, not what their mother did, just what this user did. And part of that structure is that they have clear roles and responsibilities. There is the interviewer who tells the story in order of what happened when they were out in the field. There's the note taker who writes down the key issues. There's the modelers who draw pictures of what is going on. And then there's everybody who keeps saying, capture this, capture that, so the note taker can do the job. And all these things are externalized. You can see the notes as they go. You can see the models as they're being drawn up. The idea of making the conversation concrete is age old. It was first identified by Lucy Suchman when she studied teams, that when they want to get clear on what they're trying to share or understand, they put a big piece of paper in front of them, hang over it, and draw. Externalizing the conversation instead of letting it be in the air makes sure that you're heard because it's on the piece of paper. So this is an important piece. But also, we assign a moderator and we expect people to self-monitor. The moderator is there to make sure everyone participates, to push the people who are quiet and to tell the people who talk all the time, it's not your turn. And we expect people, because we tell them that's the rule, to self-monitor. I say to them, if you're not sharing your ideas, you quiet people, you're stealing it from the group. And to those that talk too much, I say, you don't own the floor. We articulate and we clarify what's going on. When teams call up and they say it's chaos and everyone's fighting, I say to them, did you assign the moderator? And they say, no. If we create rules of engagement, it doesn't matter if they're my rules or your rules, as long as there's some articulated thing. We can overcome virtually any diversity. Now, this is really important. There's a lot of talk today about diversity because, of course, we're all different. We come from all different places and we have all different life experiences. So, yes, we're different. I find, generally speaking, though, that these differences on a day-by-day basis do not make a whole lot of difference inside of a culture of a team that is articulated and that is monitored. More interestingly, we also come with things that are born in, like our cognitive style. And things about our cognitive style drive us out of our minds more than these other sort of differences. For example, there's the Christmas lights thinker. And the Christmas lights thinker has to see all the connections between everything. And anytime they can't see the next thing, they'll hold up the entire team meeting in order to figure it out, and everyone wants to kill them. There's the web thinker, and that person puts all the ideas together and connects it into a great big vision. And they can't stand talking about the details, and they especially can't stand the diver, because the diver starts at the big idea, but if he can't drive all the way down to how it is coded, can't take a step. When you have a cross-functional team, you've got to deal with all different cognitive styles. And in the end, these get in the way much more often if you have rules of engagement than do our other differences between us. So if we think about it again, what we're really talking about is building a culture of the team, a culture of the organization in which we articulate what we are about, and then we manage ourselves to it. The team has, whether they make them on purpose or not, values. They have, whether they say it or not, expected behavior. They work out practices. They have roles. They have acceptable behaviors, and they have expectations about acceptance of other people's difference. Every team has power, and every team, for better or worse, has conflict management. But if we do not say what that is, then, of course, no one knows the rules. And when you walk in the door, you feel off kilter. Think about that. So let's make our practices and our culture explicit. And then no one has to guess. It's so much easier. So what about throwing you into the ring? What should we do to help that? And of course, this has to be aligned with corporate policies and expectations. At some level, this is kind of easy, right? Companies, simplify promotions so it doesn't feel like a giant task. Anything we measure managers on, they do. It's just that simple. In fact, anything you measure anybody on, they do. So why don't we measure managers on how much they push and support? And how about pushing great projects and not just advancement? Because that's what matters to women. Let's focus managers on the strengths of the people. Push them towards new challenges. Don't spend all your time nitpicking and evaluating and focusing on silly stuff, like if they were 5 minutes late to a meeting. I'm real tired of hearing that kind of stuff. I said in the company that we run, once a person is with the company for 6 months, they must be doing something good. At that point, you better figure out how to deal with their idiosyncrasies, because they're not going to change. Managers, give support, but more importantly, help people find supporters. Help them build the network. Set up some connections. Suggest they talk to people. And women, you've got to do the job. You got to build your band of mates and champions. You got to make those experiences. You have to find those people. And I'll tell you what I did all the time. That's how I met Hugh. It was my idea to take 8 architects, all men, for 30 days. And I promised I'd come out with 6 products integrated. And I had to walk into the room with all men. And one of the men in there stood up and said, I know why we're here. Why is she here? And then he said, let's vote. This is really true. Let's vote to decide if she should be here. You know, we need someone to keep us on track and take notes. And so they voted me in. In the end, that guy I aligned with, and Hugh, and the three of us ran that team. You have to align with the power. But of course, I ran home every night and talked to my one woman who worked with me about what was going on because it was so scary. And don't be afraid to use your pearly whites. We have all that stuff. You know how to talk to guys so they listen. I often say to the young women, use your pearly whites, create relationships. That's what you know how to do, one-on-one. Pull them in, make them interested in you. Then they listen at work. And all of you, give the push and support every day. This is a team process. And guess what? If we measured that, it would be even better. So make the push and support part of the team culture. It's more important to get it with your mates than it is to do anything else. So what about role models? What are we going to do about role models? Remember, they have to be physically near me, living a life I want to have. So they can't be, that amazing handful of women like RBG that are trotted out to prove we've got some women. It's got to be close at hand. So company, make the life of leadership attractive. Can you imagine real, serious jobs that people can do 3 and 4 days a week? Can you imagine that there's a way to advance without horrible, long, inflexible hours and tons of travel? Can you imagine a way of managing that promotes valuing others? And forget about mentorship programs. You can't mandate relationships. You can't say you're going to be the buddy of this person. It's like extra. It's better if we find them ourselves. So managers, help identify possible role models, 1 and 2 steps away, a little bit more advanced than you, right? To the side of you, so that people can find people, and not in giant networking, situations. Now you have a whole bunch of more people you have to walk into. How about setting up one-on-ones? How about indicating who might be good in the organization? You don't have to be their role model. You should be, but it's not only you. It's about a network. And all of you, you're already a role model for others. Are you living a life worth emulating? Men, are you living a life worth emulating? That's what we all have to do. So the best role models are the people we already know, at the table with us, in the meetings with us, doing the work. And what about all these feelings? I got to tell you that I go and I have meetings with women all in groups all over the country. And I say to them, this is a closed door meeting. And you can ask me anything and I will talk about it. And we sit and we talk about our lives in technology. But I only get one question from these women over and over. And they say to me, how do you walk into a room with all those men? And they say to me, aren't you ever scared? They say to me, how come you always have self-esteem? And I say to them, of course I'm scared. And of course, over the years, it was difficult. And why do you think I don't ever doubt myself? I doubt myself every time I do something new. That's part of taking the risk of doing something that you don't already know how to do. So this is the huge question on the table. And so I talk to people about how to lead with personal power. And I'll touch on this briefly because we're running out of time and I want to let us have a few questions, even if it runs past 3. Always act professionally in the face of fear. You need to find and hold your personal power. You need to remember what you already know how to do. You need to remember how really good you are. You need to feel your own value right in your guts, in the center of your chest. And when you lose it, you need to find it again. And that means calling up the people that you know. I was coaching one young woman once and I said, talk to that manager, but hold your personal power. And I told her what to do. 10 minutes later, she called me back and she said, what did you tell me? I have to write it down. And we did it again. You may have to be coached a lot before you walk in to face those 8 guys in a room for 30 days. And let me talk to you briefly about caretaking. It's the death of personal power. You cannot let the guy take care of you. You cannot let him open doors. You cannot let him drive, lift your luggage, or do you favors, because it undercuts personal power. And being taken care of is so seductive. It means you don't have to face things. When people come into our company, we give the message, because it's a straight talk culture, to the men and the women. And we say, no caretaking. You don't fix things for each other. You don't open doors, because otherwise they won't rise. Instead, push. The worst thing that ever happened to me is when those 2 guys I told you about, Hugh and the other guy, I had to go up. The company wanted me to go up against a competitive group, and I was scared. And they were like, we're not going to be in town. You can't go without us. And I didn't do it. And that was wrong. Because then I didn't see that I could rise to the competition. We do a lot of whining and blaming of men and others, and it's always their fault, and the company won't let us. I learned long ago, because, oh my God, I can't even tell you the number of conversations I had with my husband about how it was really because I was a woman that they wouldn't listen to me, and I was an assertive woman, and so they didn't like it, and all that talk about how I railroaded them and my nonverbal communication and all this stuff. It was just discrimination. Years of that, until I finally looked in the mirror. And what did I find when I took my own inventory? Well, it's not nice to roll your eyes when other people are talking. You can't take all the airtime. Being a steamroller is not so good. We have to look in the mirror and know what is our part in the interpersonal dynamics. Are you too quiet? Stop. Are you too noisy? Be quiet. One of the men I worked with who could never stop doing that either. We had a trick. We'd write everything down we wanted to say and then check if at the end of the meeting it was all covered, and then we could participate. And use cognitive intervention. We interpret the universe by what we tell ourselves about ourselves and others. If you tell yourself you're not ready for the promotion, you won't be. If you tell yourself men are undercutting your self-esteem by asking you to get the cookies instead of making a joke and letting it roll off their back, then you're going to feel undercut. It is so important that we change the conversation in our brain. But can we put in process? Can we put in structure? We routinely do this in contextual design. Let me tell you the story of my all-male German team in Germany and me teaching them the mom response. Because everybody needs to be championed when they do something they feel proud of. So I said, when you want a critique of your stuff, then you say, rip and shred. But when you want the mom response, because you're feeling like you're not heard and nobody thinks you're good enough, you raise your hand and you say, I need the mom response. And I had 10 German men in a team going, I need the mom response. And then everyone would turn to them and say, oh, you're so great. You're such a valued member of the team. And then they felt better. And at the end of that session, they came to me and told me the most important thing I taught them was the mom response. When we can have little tricks like that, or the simple trick of being heard, everyone has to be heard. If people aren't heard, they keep talking and talking and talking. So you got to write it down, then they're heard. Now you can move on. We can use tricks to help people manage their emotions. I got to skip cloud and brick. Because we can also help people declare emotional growth goals and make it acceptable to remind each other. We talked in another team that we coached about how to do the interpersonal dynamics of the team. And one of these guys realized that he was a steamroller. So he said to the group, will you help me? Every time I steamroll, I want you to raise your hand and tell me. And that's what he did. He learned to manage his behavior. In the end, we can put in techniques which can be fun if we do them with care and with value. But in the end, remember, work is not a family, and we make big mistakes about this. It's a business. Your services are rented on behalf of the company. They are not there to love you. You should never ask yourself whether you're loved. You should ask yourself whether your work is appreciated. Too often, we recapitulate family dynamics inside of the workplace. Co-workers are not your siblings or your playmates. Cross-sexual relationships are not cross-sexual relationships. They're business partners. We have to remember what is really going on when we're in the workplace. It's about working. You are always on stage. This is not let your hair down, be a buddy. And last, articulate and live by team values. That's what I've been talking to you about. Create a manifesto for your team. What do you expect when you interact with each other? What are your processes? Articulate them. Remind people of them. And weekly, daily, monthly, we introduce the concept of a process check. We simply ask the team, how are things going? We write the pluses, we write the minuses, and we get on top of the things that aren't working. And then we generate design ideas. How do you hang on to your personal value? To hold your personal power through a combination of your self-talk and team dynamics. Now, does that mean you're not in a toxic environment? You might be. And if you are, you leave, because it's up to you who you want to play with every day. But remember, don't assume it's toxic if you're misinterpreting things. It might be. Believe me, I'd counsel people to walk out. But let's start with what it would be like to hold your personal power right in your gut all the time. So what are we really talking about here? We're talking about living and having a conscious culture. We're talking about creating a culture that we can talk about at the level of the team and at the level of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We're talking about being responsible for our own behavior, because that's the only behavior that we can deal with. We have to remember, these are our myths. Women are riddled with emotions. Honey, so are men. They're full of them. They just go home and talk to their wives about it. Men are supposed to be logical, but they're not logical. They're affected by self-esteem issues. They just want to look logical. They use logic when they feel threatened. When you say, let's go out into the field and gather data, the engineers say, what are the statistics behind that? That's not a random sample. Where's that coming from? Is that logic? No, they're just scared. We're asking them to do something new. So we go, did you talk to any users? And they went, no. I said, well, you think if we talked to like 6, it would be better than talking to no one? You got to get past their feelings. We think women are good at relationships. Maybe. But when men are better networkers. That's why the old boys network is in place. Women like one-on-one. Men like to build networks. Organizations we think are run by structured processes, except they're not. It's shoved down into the team, and in the end, if you don't want to storm and form and norm, create an articulated set of rules of engagement, and then you'll already know what the norms are. Women want consistent and fair rules. The word fair is used a lot, but we don't have them. Stop looking for fair. Start looking for your influences and your influencers. So companies, are you really ready? Are you doing this? I get so many companies that tell me they're already doing this. They're not. Are you holding product and engineering responsible as opposed to HR, who can play a role, and women's organizations? Giving money to women's organizations isn't going to solve the problem. You got to get down in the guts of daily life. Don't ask women to self-promote. Push and help them find supporters. Do expect teams to define explicit daily practice based on the professional best practices of the people who are skilled on the team, but twisted to fit a proper culture. Foster more equal numbers. It's always better for women if there are 2 user researchers, 2 women coders. If there are actually product managers who are women, of which lots of companies have none. So manipulate the team structure a little. Require more even numbers, even if that means there's more women on some teams and not at all on others. And rethink onboarding. What can you do to create comfort with men? Does it make sense to have small teams where women can work successfully with their own male teams in an articulated manifesto and then do a project together so they can get comfortable? So they're not just walking into the new team and the new company in the new role on the new project. Let's think about onboarding a little bit. Let's think about what we could do every time a new person is introduced to a team. That'll help everybody. And study what's going on in daily life. We're going to do more research, but you got to look at the guts of everyday life and then articulate and redefine your manifesto together. And team, people, you are the designers of your own daily life. Take up the challenge. Who can you partner with? How can you create a little guerrilla thing going on your team to bring it to your team to help them articulate how you want to be treated? Think about it. So, what's going on with the Women's Project? You want to help? We're not done. This is a totally pro bono, sort of thing. So, if you want to help, are you a field researcher? Do you want to join me in helping to gather the data? Let Derek know in chat all about this. Do you want to help build the data? I'm looking for people who might help in Boston and in California. Do you want to be interviewed, or do you know people who might be interviewed from all these different roles and life situations? Are you a statistician? Do you have a great survey platform in your company or group? You want to help with that? Because we want to test our measure. And galvanize your company or your team. 28 years ago, when I and others started talking about bringing data into the requirements and design process, I was called a mystic and a heretic. Okay, that's what they said. It was non-scientific, and it was like, no, it was unacceptable. 28 years later, though, people think they should have data. We have new professions. We can make change, and I didn't do it. All I did is give inspirational speeches like this. You have to make the change on the ground. So let me help you. If you have an association in your city, any kind of group, invite me. Pay my expenses. I'll come. I'll talk. I'll facilitate conversation. Now, if you're going to invite me into your company to do something there, well, then I'll expect to be paid. Okay? Or call if you want to talk things over. I'm here. I'll let you know when I'm inundated. Now, if we want to go in and help you and your company expand their knowledge of what's going on with women, great. We can do that. And then we can do a workshop. But what I care about now is that we all understand these are the core principles and we all start thinking about it together. So that's me, still me. Those are all my books. And what I'm trying to do today, besides talking about cool and innovation and all the rest of it. And if you stayed this long, you can have 25% off any of these books. Let us know if you want to help. And I hope some of you are still there. We can take a few questions.
Yeah, we have a lot of people here still, Karen. So,
Great.
yeah, we had some questions earlier. Let me see. Let me go back in the log here. Corrine had a question about when you're already at a disadvantage. Let me see. Where was that? How do you get the people at the advantage to change their behavior? What's their motivation?
What do you mean when you're already at a disadvantage? If you're a UX person and we know UX people have less power than engineers? I don't know, Corrine, you're going to have to give me a little more information. But if that's the situation, you have to start, one, by saying, I'm not at a disadvantage. Hold your personal power. And two, you've got to make relationships. just like I did with that guy who voted me into the room. Think about that, right? Believe me, it rocked me back on my heels, but I didn't show them. Yeah.
Mhm.
And then you make the relationship. So you'd have to tell me more. Anything else, Derek?
Well, let me see here. I'm trying to go back in the log. Well, let's see. Should have clipped these out on the way in because it's not allowing me to scroll back that far. All right. What happens if you're in just a toxic environment? I mean, personal power only goes so far.
Yes, that's true. If the question I always have is it toxic because of the way we're seeing, or is it toxic because it's toxic? Okay. So if every single manager, woman and man alike, micromanage, if the culture of the company is to has way too many long hours or expectations than the life you want to live, if when people critique your work, they also say, not imply, because that could be misread, they say you're dumb. No one likes a critique. So you've got to make sure by talking to other people and telling your story, other people in the workplace, to find out if your perception is correct. All right, now let's assume it's correct. What do you do if it's toxic? Put your resume together, leave. That's it. All done. But get another job and know what you're looking for.
And what about, somebody had a question, Karen, about the 10 people you had interviewed that kind of spurred this, presentation. What are you going to do? Are you going to collect more data? Are you going to publish the data on the 10 that you did? Where do you go from here, and how do you reveal more?
So to remind you about that, the 10, if you know anything about qualitative research, you can use a small number of people to help identify the core themes, and that's what we did. It also opened a whole set of other questions, like what else, are men experiencing this? Do they need that as well? What's the story of women who left their organization or left the field? We'd like to gather more data on that, as well as more data on just women and women's lives, in part of fact to flesh out and to check the framework. But in parallel to that, we are also developing, as I said, this survey. We're going to run the larger survey and hope to get up to create a maturity matrix so that we can say, where is a company at in having a tight team with good problems, with the push and support, with role models, and with how they, our people are treated in the room. If we can have something like that, then I believe that if companies are scoring poorly, women aren't going to want to go to those companies. And right now, the way we evaluate companies is based on things like family leave and salary level and equal salary. So yeah, work on those things, but that's not going to affect daily life. So those are the things we're doing, and that's what we're asking, because the whole thing is all with volunteer labor. And if you want to work with me on doing this, you got to let Derek know or send to office@incontextdesign.com.
Yeah, and then Nancy asks, does anyone else notice that HR seemed to be more engaged in the booming 90s to drive some of the push support behavior? I feel that the poor economy in the mid-2000s really impacted the role.
Well, I'm not sure, and it's not fair. I'm not going to say that HR is not doing their job. It's the HR departments are the ones that own the women and the diversity issues. I myself think women are a separate issue from diversity. But in the end, if we create a coherent business culture at the level of the team, everyone's going to benefit. So whether HR has a role, my most important message is that the product, if you do not hold product development accountable, if they are not measured on it, they're going to think it's an HR thing, right? And if it's like, some top-down process that comes in, like, some new quality process, everyone goes, yeah, we've seen 10 of those coming. So if we want an intervention, it's got to be in the guts of the team. And that's what I'm talking about. And that's product development and engineering.
Okay, somebody also wants to know, I am a male ex-engineering working as a UX expert with women, mostly. And could you explain more what you just said about UX people have less power than engineers?
in most companies, and if you talk to any UX people, we don't have just power that has to do with societal power like men and women, okay? So there's a power expectation that it comes from socialized expectations for men and women. Now, this is long documented, but there is also levels of influence and power within different corporations and different companies. And across the board in our corporate culture, the engineering team who codes whatever is designed, they have always had the most power. So unless a company says, coders, you will code whatever design gives you, which nobody does that, right? Then the coders always have the power. And the UX people always are only in an influential relationship to development, which is why they have to use the typical influencers that women have always used and we're experts at, which is that you do it through the back door, through relationships, through liking you. And so ultimately, unless the user experience team is going to have real power, and by the way, an agile is great, we get products out the door, but it makes engineering more powerful again. And so design doesn't know what its place is in the world. And UX and research, where does that happen in a 2-week sprint? So what is going on here is that we have to deal not only with the power issues that come from country, culture, and gender, we have to deal with the power issues that are actually part of our own team base. And that's what we should be working on.
Okay.
I don't know if that helped. You'll have to write again.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Does anybody else have any other questions out there? We got some good feedback. You know, somebody said, as a male leader of global teams, this is hugely valuable. As always, very rewarding and engaging. Karen, great job. Okay. Any other questions out there? We could probably take another 5 more minutes. We've gone a little bit over time, but we have a few more minutes if anybody wants to do that. Okay. Will we receive a recording or PowerPoint deck after the meeting? I think what we might do is work the slide deck up into like a handout, like a summary handout. And then Karen and I will talk about whether we're going to re-air the webinar.
Yeah, we're gonna do something because the whole point here is to kick off this galvanizing the industry. I really want your help, and I'm totally meaning it when I say reach out if you want to talk or you want me to come and help galvanize your environment, your climate. I was in Seattle, and they had a group of XXUX women gathered together, and I went there and I talked. You know, you just got to get me there. If you get me there and it's an open thing, I'll just come because I really, really believe in it, and I want us to all, you know, start moving and talking. And men, yes, volunteer to be interviewed. I will tell you, you know, in the end, the men can make change, and they can actually make things happen in ways that, you know, sometimes women can't. And I'll close, if there's not another question, with this last story. You know, my late husband, when we were raising our kids, he wanted to spend time with the kids, and he was very, very involved parent. And so the only vacation policy that they had in his company at the time, excuse me, the leave policy, was that you had to take vacations anytime you had a sick kid or anything that was going on. And so even though the women wanted this, it wasn't until and he did this because he was an amazing advocate, went to management and said, why do we have to do this? Aren't you supporting families? And this is one of the good companies. And they changed the policy, and they changed it because he became the advocate. When men are the supporters, when men become the advocates and walk side by side with the women, a lot more change happens much faster. So think about it. We need everybody.
All right, we have a question from Valentina. She says, can you think of any role models, male or female, who are both an executive in industry and also the primary childcare provider in their family? I just got married and I'm looking for a new role model in my new context.
Well, the first thing that I would say is you got to ask that of your company. The second thing I will tell you is I have 2 kids, right? I don't know what your industry is, but one of the reasons I started doing this is because I was on a sales trip. No, I was giving a course in Minneapolis. And I was hanging out with one of the women there, and I felt like I was, I needed to waste some time between meetings. And I said, well, I'm going to have a coffee. Let me go let you do your work. And she said to me, are you kidding? You're one of the leaders in our field. You're my role model. And it wasn't really until she said that I realized that I actually had a responsibility. Now, you want to get the message out that all the women that have kids have a responsibility. You just have to think we're accessible. And if the women that have that situation are accessible, then they can become a role model. I don't know exactly if you're a developer or a designer or, whatever you are, but, that's a good idea. And if other people have an idea in a particular company, you'd have to tell us what your company is, but you got to look for them. And the companies have to start making them available in everyday life. But I will also tell you that Ruth Bader Ginsburg has children. So there's a bunch of us that are out there that, did not forego families. What we have to do is exemplify lives that other people want to lead.
Okay, I think that may be the conclusion of our webinar. So I want to thank everybody so much for coming. The response was fantastic. And you'll hear more from us. And if you want to book Karen, here, I'll switch back to me here. If you want to book Karen, you can email us at office@incontextdesign.com. And then we can give you more information about how Karen can come to your company, your school, and either give a lecture, talk, or individual coaching for your team, and so forth. So, all right, thank you so much for coming. We'll even send out a follow-up email with the link for how to buy Karen's books at the discount today. And we hope to see you next time. Oh, and also follow Karen on LinkedIn. Karen, do you want to give us your LinkedIn? I think you can just search for you, right, on LinkedIn.
Yeah. I mean, I'm assuming it's just Karen Holtzblatt. And I also have a Twitter where I tweet about women in innovation.
Yeah, so just K Holtzblatt on Twitter, and just search for Karen Holtzblatt on LinkedIn, and you'll be able to follow Karen on her social media there. So, all right, thank you very much for coming. And
thanks, everybody.
Yep, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.